The Hearing, a legal podcast from Thomson Reuters.
People get so offended when books are banned, and KOSA amounts to a giant online book ban. Whichever party is in charge is going to have the ability to decide what is and isn't safe for kids. KOSA can be used to censor information, essentially based on political belief. So right now, Republicans are in charge, and Democrats might be concerned that Republicans think that content about LGBTQ individuals is not good for kids. Some of the pro-life groups are also opposed to KOSA because they're concerned that if Democrats are in charge, pro-life information is going to be censored. And so I encourage people to think about it more broadly than just, I want to protect my kid and I don't want them to buy drugs online. Of course we don't, but KOSA is too broad. It's at some point going to be used to censor some information that you find dear.
Hi, welcome to The Hearing. I'm Janelle Wrigley. I'm your host for today's episode, where we're talking about legislative efforts to keep kids safe online. And in particular, we're talking about the Kids Online Safety Act, which is currently pending in Congress here in the US. And I was joined today by Jenna Leventoff, Senior Policy Counsel at the American Civil Liberties Union. And she spoke to me generally about online safety for kids, but also the ACLU's concerns about how KOSA might impact free speech and privacy rights, not only for kids, but also for adults. And I have to say, when I first heard about KOSA, about the Kids Online Safety Act, I was pretty happy. I know that for myself and many of the parents I know, it can be overwhelming sometimes to think about how to help our kids navigate safely through online spaces. And I think parents often feel like we don't have a lot of support in trying to figure out how to do that. So it sounded great to me that there's a bipartisan bill that's trying to help in this area. But Jenna came and she provided really a different point of view on the bill that's very much grounded in civil rights concerns. And she offered a very thoughtful perspective on possible unintended consequences of the legislation, even if it is very well intentioned. One thing that really hit home for me in my conversation with her was just thinking about how wide the range of concerns is that we have about kids and their safety online. We worry about so much, about kids being addicted to screens and social media. We worry about what they're being exposed to online. We worry about data privacy, all kinds of things. And so when we talk about how to make things safer for kids online, we have to be very clear about which problem we're trying to solve and to think carefully about the best way to do that. That's both effective, but that also respects our fundamental civil rights and those of our kids. So Jenna offered some thoughts on how to approach these issues that I think are well worth considering. I really enjoyed my conversation with her, and I hope you do as well.
The Hearing.
Hello, Jenna. Thank you so much for joining me today on The Hearing. Really looking forward to chatting with you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
I wanted to start, besides all of the interesting topics we're going to talk about today relating to online safety and free speech, part of what we like to do on this podcast is because our audience is legal professionals, is just hear a little bit about the guests that we have and their careers. So I was curious if you could start by just telling us a little bit about your role at the ACLU and the areas that you focus on.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am a senior policy counsel in our National Political Advocacy Division. My focus is on free speech and telecommunications. So anything from book bans to speech online, like kids online safety, to broadband access falls within the portfolio of things that I focus on here at the ACLU.
Great. And what drew you into becoming an advocate in those areas?
I want to say that it's actually law school. I had a professor who taught criminal procedure, and he would give these hypotheticals in class, and I would find myself getting so angry at things that were happening, which made me realize so much of it was related to privacy and security and technology. And I actually did an internship at the ACLU when I was in law school, followed my boss around like a puppy for the summer, and I thought, that job is awesome. I want to do that one day.
Good for you.
I got lucky. And
yeah. That's
got to
great.
do that one
So
day.
many of us, I feel like, are interested in those issues in law school, but then we end up kind of on those tracks into law firm life or whatever. But you pursued that policy passion, so that's great.
Policy is for me. Love policy.
Nice. And the ACLU, I would imagine, is a great place to do that. We have a fair amount of listeners actually outside the U.S., so it might help them just to hear a little bit about the ACLU itself and the work that it gets involved in.
The ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, we are a nonprofit focused on protecting civil rights and civil liberties in the United States across a variety of issues, from LGBTQ rights to reproductive health care to free speech.
Yeah. And one thing I love about the ACLU is, it's driven by those principles and it's probably been involved in, I would think, every major free speech case that's come to the Supreme Court or just about. And sometimes that means taking positions that are unpopular kind of across the political spectrum. So it's not, it's really driven by those principles and not by any particular sort of, political party, let's say.
It's true. I think, in my advocacy on Capitol Hill, I think I am universally unpopular.
Right. But sometimes popular, hopefully. I don't know. Maybe you get a little bit of a mix or you feel like it's...
Sometimes popular, but I think when you take a principled stance like that, it's very often my job to go to Congress and say, hey, what you're planning to do might seem right, but it's actually unconstitutional. And you can make almost everyone angry when you go in and tell them that they can't do what they want to do.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair. And we'll, of course, spend quite a bit of time talking about the Kids Online Safety Act. But that is an area where, for myself, when I first heard about this bill, I thought, well, that's great. I'm a parent. I'm sort of desperate for someone to be doing something to help me out. And then I heard that the ACLU, had some issues with it. I thought, okay. There's obviously more I need to learn about it. And that is not not what I would have expected to hear. So we'll get into all of that, though. I'm getting ahead of myself. I wanted to start with, and this may be a little bit basic to some of our listeners, but quite a few are, either outside the U.S. or maybe it's been a while since they've thought about free speech issues. So just some basics about the First Amendment and what it's all about. If you wouldn't mind, I know it's hard to summarize, but what does the First Amendment provide in terms of, our rights to free speech and free expression?
Yeah, the First Amendment is part of the U.S. Constitution, and it says Congress that shall make no law abridging freedom of speech. And by Congress, we essentially mean all facets of the U.S. government, from our federal government to our state governments to our local governments. And it covers a variety of things. So Congress can't tell us what to say or what to read, essentially what to think. We have a right to assemble and a right to protest. We have freedom of the press that's part of the First Amendment. So all of these things are protected by the First Amendment here in the U.S. You can think of it as essentially the government can't stop me from saying what I want to say.
Even if it's offensive, even if it's repulsive.
Yeah. By nature, it doesn't matter what the government thinks of your speech. There's no exception for offensive speech or even untruthful speech. The First Amendment exists to protect almost all speech, because if you allow the government to decide, say, what is offensive and what's not offensive, there are times when, the best meaning government will shut down almost all of us because something that we say is bound to be offensive to someone. But an abusive government could take that even further. Abusive government could say, they could simply say something is offensive and shut it down that way. And that's how you wind up with an authoritarian state that doesn't let you have freedom of speech, freedom of thought, freedom of belief. You don't get to get both sides of that issue. And so, the First Amendment is there just by nature to protect speech that someone doesn't like, because you don't want to give the government that ability to say what's okay and what's not.
So why is free speech online important?
The internet is the new town square. I think people inherently understand that they should be able to go to their town square to protest something that they don't like that's happening. The internet is where that happens now. The internet is where we do political organizing. The internet is where we talk to our friends and family. It's where we read the news. It's where we do almost everything nowadays.
Yeah.
And so if you're not protecting free speech online, you're not protecting free speech. The internet is where we exercise our free speech rights.
And are there any sort of unique challenges to protecting free speech in that online space compared to, speech in person or in a printed newspaper, for example?
Yeah, I think so, right? Because people think of the internet as somehow being different from the physical world. They think of apps and websites as different from newspapers. They think of the internet sometimes as this big, scary thing. And it can be. There's things that are possible on the internet that aren't possible in the physical world. But ultimately, this has been sort of the challenge for as long as the First Amendment has existed and technology has existed, is that something new comes up and everyone gets scared of it. We saw it initially. People were scared of photography. People were scared of video games. In all of these cases, people thought that somehow technology made something new and scary and different. And, they sort of stop applying that First Amendment scrutiny lens that they would probably apply in the real world. They get it when it comes to books, when it comes to newspapers, when it comes to the town square, and they just don't get it when it comes to the internet because it feels so big and scary.
Is part of that because, especially when it comes to kids, there's this sense that you can't always see what's going on. It feels so, what your kids might be doing. It feels very difficult to kind of get your hands around everything that's out there versus, if my kid walks into a library, I can kind of see what's going on. You know what I mean? Is it that visibility aspect that worries people a little bit?
I think so. I think it's that the internet is so broad and there's so much information on it. And, obviously not all of that information is good for kids or for adults, depending on who you ask. There's things on the internet that are pretty universally considered bad. And it probably is harder to police what your kids are doing online than what they're doing in the library. That said, I think kids have always had access to things that are bad and scary. So maybe the internet has changed some of how it's going, but a lot of the problems that I think parents are concerned about with the internet today were problems that existed before, but maybe the internet has just expanded their scale.
Right. Yeah. I do want to talk about, it's the main topic that we're talking about today is this world of online safety, especially when it comes to kids. And we'll talk about the Kids Online Safety Act. But I wanted to start just by, talking about the risks and the positives that kids face online. So starting with the positive, what do you see as the ways in which online spaces or online resources are actually important for young people, to find that freedom of expression online?
We've seen that kids like to be able to express themselves artistically, but I think there's something about the community that the internet enables that's beyond where someone physically lives that is so helpful to kids. I know a lot of individuals that have illnesses or disabilities are able to find community online with other people that have, say, that rare disease and figure out what treatments work or just find a sense of support. LGBTQ kids who maybe live in a small town and didn't know, what their community or life could look like until they were able to meet other people like them online. We have actually, the ACLU runs an advocacy institute every year where we have high school students come to DC and learn how to advocate on policies that are important to them. And one student, this year we were actually focused on KOSA, and one student shared his personal story with me that, it broke my heart, but it was also, really encouraging. He essentially shared that he was suicidal and life was hard and he was scared. And it was actually the internet that helped him find value and the will to live and the resources he needed for his mental health. He's here, he's thriving, he's advocating. He's asked me how he can reach out to his member of Congress. And, I think that everyone has something that they can gain and learn from the internet, even if it's just an easier access to news. But that sense of community, I think, is really probably one of the most positive things that kids and adults alike can get on the internet.
Yeah, that's great. It's great to hear about that work too, directly with teenagers that you're doing. I was curious.
So impressive.
Yeah, I mean, I worry sometimes that kids are becoming cynical about, things like free speech or things like policy advocacy when you kind of look at the world around us right now. I mean, how are you finding the kids these days?
The students at our advocacy institute are not like that. I mean, they are energized, they care, they do their research. The questions that they ask me are questions that professionals in the field wouldn't even think of. I mean, they know what's going on in the world. I mean, perhaps it's a biased sample of kids that are drawn to come to our advocacy institute, but they're absolutely inspiring, and they make me feel like our country is in good hands moving forward.
Well,
these kids are incredible.
Good to
truly.
hear.
Yeah.
Sort of returning to the online world that these kids are facing. What do you see as some of the risks and some of the some of the main risks that children or teenagers might face online right now?
I think that everything that can harm kids in real life exists on the internet. You can buy drugs on the internet. There's obscene content that many parents are uncomfortable with their kids having access to. There are child predators. There is content that, could make students develop eating disorders. I mean, the internet can sort of exacerbate harms that maybe we see anyway. It allows for online bullying. So it's not like everything's all roses. But I do think it's problems that largely existed before that we still see now.
Yeah.
Maybe with the sort of addition of addiction. I think some people are addicted to the internet, and that's maybe sort of the one new harm that we're seeing in kids today. Yeah.
What do you make of, the platform's efforts to address some of these risks so far?
I think a lot of platforms, there's certainly things that they can do to improve kids' online safety, everyone's online experience. It's hard to police the internet. I think platforms are in the situation where they have to decide, is this okay for this user? Is this something that we want to allow on our platform? Platforms do moderate the content that they have on their platform. They have terms of service, and according to that, they try to decide if something violates their terms of service. It's a hard question, and we see this in the First Amendment world too. So take, for example, a picture of a woman breastfeeding. If a woman uploads that to Facebook and it has her full breast in it, is that science? Is that educational? Is that teaching a woman how to breastfeed? Is that sexual content? How do you know, right? And so platforms face this really difficult situation of trying to decide what fits within their own terms of service and what doesn't. And in many cases, it's AI that is taking the first stab at this.
Right. Maybe using term filtering, looking for certain terms and kind of, applying blanket rules.
And human review comes later.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I do want to ask you about a little bit more later about, ideas for, things we could be doing better.
The Hearing.
You're an attorney with a passion to perform, a drive to be absolutely on your game. With superior resources, serious preparation, and total confidence. Be your best with Thomson Reuters Practical Law.
As allegiances are tested.
You're gambling with World War III.
And regimes fall.
Fighters and civilians continue to stream in from other parts of Syria.
No matter where the story is, Reuters World News podcast is there. We make sense of the news shaping our world and give you everything you need to know in a 10-minute podcast every weekday. I'm your host, Kim Vanell. Listen and follow wherever you get your podcasts.
Let's turn to KOSA, the Kids Online Safety Act. This is an effort by Congress to address some of these issues. I think it passed the Senate in the last session and then failed in the House, and it's been recently reintroduced in this session. Let's just start, for those who are unfamiliar with it, if you wouldn't mind just telling us what is KOSA? What does it do?
KOSA is the Kids Online Safety Act. The core component of KOSA is that it says that apps and websites have a duty of care to stop their design features from causing a list of harms to kids. And those harms include anxiety, depression, eating disorders, physical harms. Design features is a new component of the bill that was added within the past couple of years. I think the history is helpful here. Initially, KOSA just said platforms have a duty of care to protect kids from these harms. And First Amendment groups like the ACLU came in and said, it's content that is causing these harms, and the First Amendment does not allow you to regulate content. And so Congress goes, yeah, good point. It's about the design features. It's not about the content anymore. But then when you look at how they've defined the design features, for example, notifications is considered a design feature. When you think through what is the harm of a notification, I get 5,000 notifications about text messages a day. Do we consider that harmful? Not really. It ultimately comes down to the content of the notification, right? Also included is sort of image altering software. Do people get mad when you put like a cat whiskers on your face? No. It's when it comes to some of the more deep fake or creepy filters that maybe we get angry. And so ultimately, we view this legislation as still being an effort to stop platforms or to give platforms this duty to stop kids from seeing harmful content.
So for the supporters of KOSA, what are the core intentions there? What harms are they, or what problems are they trying to fix by using this approach to kind of creating a duty of care around the design features?
I think they want to stop what they view as the harms of the internet, which is increasing rates of anxiety and depression amongst kids, increasing rates of eating disorders, access to illegal substances, and the like.
From the ACLU's point of view, are there particular provisions in the bill that are more concerning when you look at it?
The most concerning provisions to us are that duty of care that I just talked about, that duty that platforms have to essentially stop kids from seeing content that is harmful. That provision is enforced by the Federal Trade Commission. And implied within that duty of care is this requirement to verify the ages of users. So if you are TikTok or Instagram and you have a duty to protect kids from these harms, you're going to want to know which of your users are kids and which of your users are adults. And you can't just ask someone what their age is, because a kid could say they're an adult or something like that. So It's sort of inherent within this is this non-written requirement that platforms are going to have to verify the ages of their users, which we have a number of First Amendment problems with as well. So I'd say our biggest issues are this duty of care, and I can get into our issues with the duty of care as well as this age verification component.
Yeah, please do. I'd be happy for you to expand on the duty of care piece.
Okay, so first, having this duty of care, platforms are going to over-censor content that is protected. So if you are a platform, and there's a couple of different ways that this can work, but if you're a platform and you know that the Federal Trade Commission is going to come after you if you allow kids to see something that they view as harmful, you're sitting there trying to be like, okay, what will this Federal Trade Commission think is harmful to kids? First of all, in the case of this FTC and what we see in book bans around the country is that is very often content about LGBTQ individuals, reproductive health care, marginalized communities, right? So one, they might just sort of try to take down content that's relevant to those communities. But even if they don't do that, even if they say narrowly want to target porn, right now they're largely using AI for content moderation. And within the word sexual orientation or sexual identity is sex. And so in many cases, this content that maybe the platforms aren't trying to take down is going to get automatically taken down by the AI just because it can't distinguish. Or, for example, let's say a platform wants to take down content about eating disorders because they don't want kids having access to this content that can cause eating disorders. How is the AI going to know the difference between someone sharing their story overcoming an eating disorder versus this pro-eating disorder content? They're very different things harm-wise. but the AI can't tell the difference. And so we think it's going to lead to the takedown of a lot of lawful and protected speech, and speech that is particularly important to some communities, that they need that, like that information is actually helpful to kids in many scenarios.
So on the one hand, it's giving the government a lot of discretion to decide what's appropriate and inappropriate, just in terms of the standards. And then on the other, the ACLU's argument is there's no real way to put this into practice without being kind of overbroad, just the way these things work in reality from how they're implemented. Is that a fair synopsis on that front?
That's correct. One, it gives the government the ability to decide what is and isn't okay for kids to see. And so this federal government can decide for kids across the country who have different priorities that come from different places, what's good for them and what's not good for them. It takes that control out of parents' hands and then puts it into the government's hands. And then two, technology and platforms' legal risk isn't in a place where they're going to take any chances. And so it's likely that even information they aren't necessarily intending to take down will come down.
Got it. And then on the age verification side, is that is that a privacy concern primarily?
It's a privacy concern and it's a speech concern. So the ways that platforms right now can verify someone's age is they can either do facial scanning or someone can essentially upload their identification. So let's take uploading your identification, for example. What if you don't have a driver's license anymore because you're a senior citizen? You don't have a passport. You don't travel anymore. You're lawfully able to access all this information online, but you can't because you don't have an ID. Or what if you're just technologically kind of illiterate and you're unable to figure out how to upload your identification? Again, we're shutting off adults who are lawfully able to access these spaces on the internet from doing it because they can't verify their age. You can also see that happen with facial scanning. If someone has a baby face and the platform can't prove that they're an adult, they'll be shut out from these spaces, which is a huge First Amendment problem. It's also somewhat ineffective because if you're a kid that looks old, you might be able to get in. We also say that there's a chilling effect. So we live in this world of data breaches and publicizing all this information. If you know that you need to turn over your identification before accessing information online, particularly if it's embarrassing information, are you going to do it?
Right.
You probably won't. So there's this chilling effect for adults when you have to do age verification. There's also all of the privacy risks. We're giving these companies that have repeatedly misused data even more of our information.
Yeah. And I've seen anecdotally, it's outside your purview. We don't need to go into detail, but to the extent I've been seeing a little bit about the UK Online Safety Act that recently went into effect, I've just anecdotally seen some discussion online that some kids, it has not taken them long to figure out how to get around the age verification, whereas adults kind of might get blocked from it because they don't know how to use it. You've got kids who it probably takes them 30 seconds to figure out how to, put a fake ID in and get right past it. So the challenges of trying to get the goals that you're trying to achieve with some of this legislation to meet the reality of kind of what's possible on the internet and how creative people can be to get around some of these things just feels like, such a huge challenge.
Our Advocacy Institute kids thought of about 10 ways to evade age verification in 30 seconds.
Right. Right. Oh, man.
So yes, in addition, it just might not be effective.
Right. So are there parts of the bill that you or that the ACLU finds more acceptable or that might be the foundation of better approaches to this?
There's some components of the bill that are more focused on like privacy and user controls. KOSA isn't perfect. We would suggest other methods. But I think that's a good way to think about this. Is a great way to protect kids online is to give them control over their online experience. If we're concerned about kids being addicted to the internet, maybe platforms should offer, an ability to cut yourself off after a certain time. If we're concerned about kids seeing ads for things that are harmful for them, maybe they should have the ability to say that their data can't be used for ads. We need comprehensive privacy legislation and we need user controls. We're also afraid I hear a lot of concern nowadays about deepfakes and how do I know if something's true? How do I know if something's false? digital literacy skills. We need to be teaching people how they know if something is, created by AI, how to safely navigate the internet, teaching people this is a site I can trust. This is a site that I can't trust. This is, safe ways to navigate the internet. All of these things I think are more helpful ultimately than controlling what kids can and can't see online.
Yeah, that's really interesting to think about approaching the safety aspect for kids more from that privacy angle and just giving kids or helping parents have more insight and control over what's happening, to the way companies are using this data. I hadn't thought about that.
It's also worth noting that the First Amendment doesn't apply to parents. Parents can censor their kids all they want, and it's not a First Amendment problem. The First Amendment only applies to the government trying to say what individuals can and can't say or can and can't see. It doesn't say that parents aren't allowed to guide their kids to the content that they think is appropriate for them. It doesn't even say that platforms can't do that. Platforms actually have their own First Amendment rights to make their platform what they want them to be. So it's well within a platform's right to say, we don't want to allow this kind of content on our platform. Actually, we think it's dangerous for kids. And there's no First Amendment problems when it's parents and when it's platforms stepping in to create what they view as that safety.
So you might hear people say, free speech, the First Amendment, that's all well and good. But when it comes to kids, we're talking about children here. Parents can only do so much to control what their kids see. I mean, our kids are part of society. They go to school, they hang out with their friends. So, some people might argue you need some censorship. You need to take a stronger hand when it comes to the safety of kids. What would you say to that?
Kids have First Amendment rights just like adults do. The First Amendment doesn't care if you're a kid or if you're an adult. There's limited circumstances where kids have reduced First Amendment rights. For example, if they're in school and actually being disruptive in class. But for the most part, the First Amendment exists to protect speech that people view as bad. I was getting into this earlier in the podcast, but once you give the government the ability to say, this is bad and this is good, you don't have this marketplace of ideas. People can't learn, people can't grow. You have all you're able to learn and think is what the government tells you can learn and think. And it's the most lawyery thing ever, but the slippery slope is real.
Yeah.
And I think we see this in some of the ways that the administration is treating speech right now. I think the other thing, that sometimes brings it into perspective for people is, are you going to parent your kid the same way that someone else across the country is going to parent your kid? And do you trust how they parent? The answer very well may be no. There are some parents who want their kids to see certain things and some parents who think that is unsafe. And so when you give that ability to the government to decide for everyone, you might not be able to parent your kids the way that you want to parent them and have them access information you want them to access or not access information you don't want them to access because the government isn't giving you that choice.
Right.
And so I hope that argument's convincing to people that they're substituting their judgment for your judgment, and you very well may not agree. It might seem like, oh, we all agree on what's bad for kids, but do you? Right.
Yeah, it's that piece of it. It's not necessarily that everything's great on the internet and we need to do nothing to protect kids, but do you want it's that government piece of it, right? Do you want the government to be the ones, setting the standards or making these decisions? I think the challenge is, speaking as a parent, is there is just that feeling of kind of helplessness sometimes. And I remember when my son's 9, and I remember when he was born, I thought, well, I hope by the time he's coming into this world of social media and the internet that we've got this figured out. And I can't say that we have 9 years later. And so there is this desperation, I think, amongst parents to just want help from somewhere, So maybe that's why KOSA has been so popular, why it has bipartisan support,
That's absolutely why. It's called the Kids Online Safety Act. No one
who opposes online safety for kids. Yeah.
Who opposes online safety for kids?
No.
We don't. We also,
no, of course you don't.
We want online safety for kids, but censorship just isn't the way to do it.
Are there ways that we talked about? Well, I guess we talked about this with the kind of privacy angle, the user data angle. Are there any other ways that the platforms and the technology companies could be doing better in this area without, resorting to controlling the actual content of speech?
I mean, like I said, platforms actually can constitutionally censor speech, and so we don't have a problem to the extent that they do that. That's not something where the ACLU would get involved. And so if there is an example where a platform thinks that some speech isn't okay for kids and they censor that, and then that draws them an audience of parents and kids who don't want their kids to see that speech, we think that's how the internet's supposed to work. Platforms are supposed to be able to create the spaces that they want to create and attract the users who want that kind of space.
Yeah. Anything else on KOSA that we didn't talk about that is worth mentioning?
Once again, I just want to compare it to book bans, right? I see so many people who get so offended when books are banned, and KOSA amounts to a giant online book ban. And it is a bill that can be politicized. So whichever party is in charge is going to have the ability to decide what is and isn't safe for kids. And if you've ever had political disagreements with the party in charge on what they think is good and what they think is bad, KOSA can be used to censor information essentially based on political belief because it's enforced by the Federal Trade Commission. So right now, Republicans are in charge, and Democrats might be concerned that Republicans think that content about LGBTQ trans individuals is not good for kids. They've said that. Marsha Blackburn, one of the sponsors of KOSA, has pretty much said that she wants to go after information about gender-affirming care. Some of the pro-life groups are also opposed to KOSA because they're concerned that if Democrats are in charge, pro-life information is going to be censored. You can see, I can imagine that some people that are very pro-gun access, you could see information about guns being taken down because that is physically violent. And so there's probably some information that you believe in that you want to be able to access that will be censored under KOSA. And so I encourage people to think about it more broadly than just, I want to protect my kid and I don't want them to buy drugs online. Of course we don't. But KOSA is too broad. It's at some point going to be used to censor some information that you find dear.
I wanted to ask a little bit about where the courts are at with some of these issues right now. How are they handling some of these debates about how to protect free expression and also protect vulnerable kids or, vulnerable groups online? The cases I'm familiar with, I know, and I think in recently age verification laws in Texas for accessing pornography were upheld. Are there other notable cases that you're seeing out there?
There are a number of states who have passed bills that are similar to KOSA in one way or another. And in most of those cases at the district court level, those laws have been deemed unconstitutional, actually. Then the Supreme Court came in recently with Paxton, and they said that Texas's age verification law can continue, but it's not as broad as what you say it is. So in Paxton, the Supreme Court said that you can do age verification essentially for obscenity. They did not say age verification is okay across the entire internet for every type of website or platform. They really limited it to Texas's law is about websites that have 1/3 of information that is obscure as to minors. And the court said it's okay to do age verification for that, but they didn't go further. So they didn't write this blank check to do age verification that KOSA would essentially be.
Got it. And do you see, courts trending or the Supreme Court trending in any particular direction on this, or do you think it'll be sort of taken on a case-by-case basis going forward?
I think it'll be taken on a case-by-case basis, but I do think courts have largely defended First Amendment rights, and the ACLU's name is in many of those cases. We've seen the courts say, we know you want to protect kids, but that doesn't allow you to burden speech rights, particularly for adults.
And what do you see, this will be my last question, what are the biggest challenges ahead for your advocacy in the area of online speech?
I think it's the discussion that we've just had. This bill, the intent is to protect kids. That is valuable. That is important. We should absolutely be protecting kids. And so when you have to come in and say, I understand how important this is. I understand that this can be life and death for kids. This just isn't the way to do it. That's hard. That's a real challenge in advocacy because the lawmakers, the parents, this is so important to them. And to say that their idea isn't necessarily even protecting kids, it's probably causing some level of harm to kids because it's censoring so much information that they can or can't see. That's a really hard thing to lobby on. And I've been name called, and which free speech, hey, and right. I'm all for it. But but like it's challenging because we all want to protect kids. And so to say that this bill that has sort of the most momentum as the way to do that is not the way to do that is a real challenge.
Yeah. Well, Jenna, this has been very interesting. I love hearing your perspective of the ACLU on this bill. I certainly learned a lot. I had that journey myself of thinking, well, KOSA must be a good thing. How could anybody oppose this to really understand?
Whoever named KOSA
knew what they were doing.
Whoever named it, you get a raise.
But yeah, it's so interesting to hear, these deeper perspectives on the principles that can be implicated by some of these efforts. So really appreciate you taking some time to share that with us. And thanks again.
Thank you so much.
The Hearing.
Thanks again for listening. As always, please feel free to send us any thoughts or feedback or episode ideas to us at thehearing@tr.com. Bye.
The Hearing, a legal podcast from Thomson Reuters. To find out more, go to tr.com/The Hearing or subscribe via iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.